Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Amma ba'd, habati fillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أسأل الله كريم رب العرش العظيم أن يتولنا في دنيا والآخرة. أحبتي في الله, I wanted to talk about something which is critical for us as Muslims, because Muslims, part of the maqsad of the issue of zawaj, of marriage, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated so that we as human beings can realize our potential with the beautiful traits of mawadda wa rahmah, that Allah will place that in between spouses, which is love and mercy. And so as Muslims, we should be striving to have that in our lives, because every one of us knows life is not easy. Life is not smooth. Life is not comfortable in general, but especially being lonely and alone. It's very important that we all strive to have righteous companionship, and one of the highest levels of companionship is having a righteous, pleasing spouse, and comfort and mercy and love in your home. Ahabati fillah, it's very important for us to know and understand that marriage and divorce are mashru'. These are legislated institutions in order to fulfill the purpose and to help us fulfill our purpose in life. And we know the purpose in life, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونِ. I've not created mankind and the jinn except for the purpose of worshiping me. Having a righteous spouse, a righteous companion, can help you fulfill that maqsad, that purpose. Without that, you are basically on your own and you don't have that righteous support. And again, we're talking about the good aspect, meaning we're talking about righteous companionship, a righteous spouse, for a man to have a righteous wife or wives that remind him to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that help him and assist him in worshiping Allah azza wa jal. For the woman, it's a husband who helps guide her to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a husband who helps her and reminds her to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to keep the boundaries of the halal and the haram. And likewise, the woman reminds her husband to keep the boundaries of the halal and the haram. And so righteous companionship is very important. So when we look at this institution of marriage and the institution or the breaking down of that or the dissolving of that, which is divorce or khula, then we see that marriage in Islam, it also fits on the ahkam al-khamsa, that marriage in Islam can sometimes be an obligation upon a person. For example, if a man or a woman is in a situation where they can't control themselves, they are actually in a state of danger, they are really fearful of falling in zina, like it's to fall into fornication, or they know that they constantly masturbate, or they know that they are going to fall into wicked habits of watching pornography, and then what leads from that. Then under these circumstances, it becomes an obligation if the person is able to marry, meaning they can't control themselves. Another hukum or ruling is that marriage can also be mustahab. It can be highly recommended. For example, maybe a woman, a girl or a woman or what have you, she really desires to be married, but she can control herself. Maybe she's finishing her university. Maybe she is a working woman and she has a plan, or he has a plan in the man's situation, that he is going to get married soon, that they're on a program. Maybe they're engaged. Maybe they're in the process of looking, whatever the case may be, but they're not in a big hurry and they're able to. So under those circumstances, it is highly recommended that they marry, but maybe it's not an obligation because they can control themselves. They're not going to fall into the haram. The third category is someone who is a person who, maybe it could fall under makruh. It could be disliked that a person gets married. For example, if a man, he has a wife and family, but he can't really take care of them. And this is a common scenario. And what prompted me to talk about this is there are many brothers, they want a second wife, for example, or they want to get married and they don't have the means to even take care of their first family. So their first family, in the UK, we say living on the dole. In America, we say they're on welfare. Oh, I want you to get housing. Hey, honey, please go get government housing. And so that way we can get the benefits from the disbelieving government to take care of our household. So then the disbelieving government is actually the maintainer of the household. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, men are the maintainers and protectors of the women. This is something I really wanted to emphasize because a lot of us have abdicated that responsibility. We've left it. We gave it to the American government, to the state of Washington, to the state of Minnesota, to the we've given this to Hull, England. We've given it to Birmingham. We've given our response, to the Swedish welfare system. We've allowed them. They're the men in our households because they give the check. They make the decisions. They give the criterion. But as men, we just sit by. We say, hey, I can seek knowledge. I can just do whatever, hang out with the brothers. I can whatever because my woman is taken care of from the state. So this is can also be makruh. It can also be muharram. That's another category. Is sometimes it can be haram for a man to get married. And this is as the ulama state. I can't think of any particular scenarios, but perhaps that could be one. If he's unable to, and he's going to be oppressive towards marrying a second or third or fourth wife, or even he's not married and he wants to marry, and there's some sort of cheating and deception and harm involved, then this can actually be muharram. It can be muharram to get married. In light of this, we see that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam said, Ya ma'ashar shabab, man istata'a minkum al-ba'a falyatazawwaj. O you youth who are able to get married, al-ba'a falyatazawwaj, then marry. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam gave a command, and this is only part of the hadith, the prescription, the shahid of the hadith, which is about getting married, that the Prophet ﷺ commanded the youth to get married. And this goes for anyone who needs to get married, but specifically the youth, as the scholars mention, because they are mostly at the stage in life where they need to get married. So that's why the youth specifically are ordered, because they're the ones in our societies going to the clubs and going out mostly. I mean, they're more inclined than someone who's older to do that. And they are more, their desires are less easily able to be harnessed compared to when someone is older. That's in general. So the Islam deals with al-ghalibiyya, that which is the overwhelming scenario. The overwhelming scenario is that when you're in a youthful stage, you are more prone to do those things and to be a little wild, so to speak. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ addressed the youth. Ya ma'ashar shabab, min istata'a minkum al-ba'a. So the Prophet ﷺ then said, those who are able from amongst you that have al-ba'a. So the scholars, they mention this word al-ba'a, that this refers to one or two things, and it can be both. And I'm of the view that it refers to both, that you have the physical and the financial prowess, the physical prowess and the financial ability. Al-ba'a referring to physical prowess and financial well-being. So even the scholars and some of the shuruhat and some of the explanations of this hadith, they mentioned that someone who doesn't have the physical prowess, then they shouldn't be getting married. They shouldn't be, for example, if you have a man, and what happens in many societies in Asia and Africa and in traditional societies, You'll have an 80-year-old man. He's well off, maybe, and whatever. And they give him a virgin girl, and she's 16, 17, 18, 19, whatever. She's in beginning and, fruitful. So he is unable. At 80, some are able to, but still, he's unable to keep up with her physically. He's unable to satisfy her, more than likely physically. He's perhaps unable to have children, but yet she's ripe. So we see that this is a type of oppression, and this is a type of this is the inability, or it can be a type of oppression, and it is the he is unable to fulfill physically what is, maybe he's impotent, and that can happen for young people too. So that should be discussed, that he's maybe unable to have children, akramakumullah. The second meaning of al-ba'a that some of the scholars mention, and that's talking about the financial ability, and this is where we see a lot of oppression. Unfortunately, we see it in a lot of polygamous situations. For example, literally, I've discussed with people who are trustworthy, telling me about certain marriages in Philadelphia where the brother, who's already got 2 to 3 wives, he's looking for the 4th. He's saying, and literally in a sit down saying, "Sister, how are you going to take care of me? Or how are you going to take care of us?" Meaning, do you have a job? Because I'm not going to work. I'm a student of knowledge. I'm hanging out in the masjid. And my other wives are on welfare. Can you imagine something as despicable as that? That this is actually something that actually happens in many of our places, some of the cities where it's known, some types of city, like in Birmingham, England, and probably in London as well. But we know this from the countless stories and tales that we've heard from the people who live there and who are from there, also in Philadelphia, that you actually would have a man to have the gall. Can we call that a man? That's questionable. That's questionable. But this is such a disgrace in dawah. It's a disgrace in the religion, because there's many sisters that leave Islam or they lose their iman due to this type of oppressiveness. Also, it taints the beautiful, pristine institution of polygamy. Fourthly, it shows a disregard for the dawah to Allah's deen and the intent of marriage, because we know countless scenarios where, and even here in Seattle, Washington, there's so many people, they come to America and they abuse the welfare system, and they say, I don't know where my husband is. So we have sisters that wear niqab from some of our communities, and they go and they have countless children. Oh, this is Muhammad, this is Fatima, I don't know who the father is, in order to gain government benefits. Do you think Allah is pleased with that? So not only that, you have destroyed the dawah. Some of the people have even given the Muslim women the description of being, prostitutes. Let's say that's the nicest way we can say it. Why? Because, she doesn't know the father. I don't know who this father is, so she can get benefits. I don't know who this father is, so she can get benefits. Even so much so, they will falsely marry their brothers and others to gain benefits. Anything to gain benefits. And is this a benefit with Allah? You have to question yourself. Ahabati fillah, the shahid being, meaning the main point being that there are different rulings regarding the institution of marriage. Sometimes it can be an obligation, sometimes it can even be muharram, haram. Also, there is the same ahkam regarding divorce. Sometimes it can be an obligation to divorce. For example, maybe a man is a very oppressive to his family, and this could be physical or mental or spiritual oppression. So there are times when it can be an obligation, he must divorce her. For example, if it is a situation where he stops practicing Islam, he becomes a wicked sinner, he is in the clubs, he's drinking, he's smoking weed, he's got girlfriends and stuff like this. Well, there could be a period of maybe everyone has to determine when that period is of when to divorce. Some women are like, no way, if my husband ever did that, it's a wrap. I want a khula, I want a separation, dissolution of the marriage, or we'll go to the judge to have him make my husband divorce me. So there can be times when it's an obligation. There can be times when it's also disliked. Okay, and we're not going to run through all the particular scenarios, but uh, or there's times when it can be recommended to get a divorce, meaning that it's, there's a lot of horrible things. It may not be an obligation, but it's the marriage is so toxic, it's so dangerous, and there isn't really hope in restoring those marital bonds. So it can be a situation where it becomes recommended, highly recommended, that the woman is divorced, or that she seeks a khula, she seeks dissolution of the marriage. And then it can be makruh. It can also become muharram. So a man, he has 4 or 5 children, and he just says, I need a nice, real young wife. I'm just going to divorce you, and without any real substance to it, and just leave you homeless and stuff like this, or whatever the case may be. There can be times when it can be muharram. So there are various scenarios, and when it comes to the actual implementation, that is analyzed by the scholars and the people of knowledge, who can look and analyze these and deduce a Sharia-based ruling with regards to these matters. Ahabatifillah. So now I want to talk about when it actually becomes toxic in a marriage. When a marriage is just, it's basically collapsed, or it's on the verge of collapsing. And the maqsad here is to encourage people to stay together and encourage people to build the marital bonds. But there are times when things have decayed and broken down, and there's not really much hope in making the positive change and understanding between the individuals, to have that love and that mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated. So one of the ways in which the marriage can become very toxic is when a husband, or even the wife, is always spying on her husband, or the husband is always spying on his wife. So that shows that there's a lack of trust. If he has to look at every phone text message, every time she's on WhatsApp, every time she's on Facebook, without any justifiable cause, just because of his paranoia, this shows a type of paranoia. Sometimes it could be mental disorder, but sometimes it can just be toxicity and a lack of trust. So if it becomes like this is number one of the traits of toxicity. Another trait of toxicity, ahabatifillah, is when there isn't any mercy in the marriage anymore. There's always harsh and vile speech. So some husbands, they lose their Islam in their home. They curse, they curse their women and so forth. Likewise, there are women who are like this. They're even physically and uh, abusive on the tongue towards their husband. They cuss them. They speak ill. They backbite. They just bring backbiting in the house. They bring ghiba and namima in the house, slander and other. That's all they do. It's like they get together to slander and talk about everybody else's household and not deal with their own problems. So this is also a sign of toxicity. Ahabatifillah, another time when there is, or another scenario when is illustrating that there's toxicity in the marriage and that things need to be kind of repaired and looked at, is when there is a situation where the man or the woman has total control. Like there's no breathing anymore. There's no anything. Everything is totally controlled, and there's lashing out. For example, some men are actually violent just because their wife did not cook properly. She burned the rice, whatever. They can actually come to violence, or just ostracizing or cursing her or attacking her or belittling her. This is also toxicity. And when it comes to the violence, this is a type of evil as well. So when there's a total control and a total breakdown in understanding and this can be a sign where there's a need, if it can't be addressed, where there's a need to dissolve the marriage. And there's so many other scenarios, so many other things to consider. Depends if there's children, depends on the society, what opportunities is there after that for the woman to get married or for her to establish a life, or there's various scenarios. So this is not a blanket, you know, you must get out of a marriage or you must stay in a marriage scenario. That's not the intent here. The intent here is to highlight some things when people need to address their marital situation. And that's, as I said, violence. Violence is unacceptable because you have to think about, do you approve violence being implemented towards your mother? Do you approve with violence being implemented towards your sisters? Do you want them to have husbands like that? Or if you are in a situation where you have children and you have girls and you understand that beautiful bond and the mercy and the love and the everything with the girls, can you ever imagine somebody abusing your girls? No. You would want to take things into your own hands and deal with things in another way. That's just how it is, sometimes real. Let's be real about it. So it's very important to keep things in a positive, righteous, and merciful light. Another a way of dealing. How do we deal with these scenarios? The first way, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, is you seek counsel. So you get maybe a party from her family and a party from his family. And if you don't have Muslim families or what have you, you can go to the imam. You can go to something and have a sister represent the sister, or something, or her wali. There's various means. What we fail to do often is to get this kind of counsel when there's a breakdown, when there's this. You have so many marriages that people want to hide their problems. And this actually is not a good way for solving, because I've seen many times, for example, in my culture, it's a big thing. As men, African-American men, for example, we don't like our business in the street. We don't like people to know if there's problems in our household. We will ride it till the wheels fall off. But that's not correct necessarily. There's times when you need counsel. There's times when you need to seek help outside of the marriage. And a lot of times you see the beauty and the fruit when people do it, and you see their marriages stick together. And that's a beautiful thing. Or they dissolve, at least in peacefulness and in righteousness. And that's great. That's beautiful that there's a peaceful resolution. Not she's kicked him out of the house and called the police. Not that she's thrown weapons out. Not that he's beaten her black and blue and she's at a shelter. No, those aren't peaceful resolutions. Those aren't Islamic means of dealing with things. And so that's why counseling can help alleviate that. And counseling can help at least resolve, either, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, that you have the islah, you have the rectification, either have the islah, the rectification in peace, or you separate in peace. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, and this is what we want to do. So you can get the parties from the families to help to intercede, or from the council in the community, or from the imam, or from the Islamic center. Lastly, Habitifillah, something I want to highlight is that when we go into marriage, so this is for newlyweds, whether they've been married a million times or not, or they're newlyweds in their first time marriage, is go into the marriage with the idea and the concept of being in it to win it. In it to win it. Not that this is a temporary fix. Oh, I need some halal, so I'm going to marry her real quick, keep a couple weeks and whatever. If you go with that mentality, more than likely that will be. And a lot of times there's other harmful things that result. Maybe she gets pregnant and you just intended something temporary, or she's just been so abused, she just takes it as, oh, I need another husband. I need halal. I don't care. I'm not going to put effort into it. And then she gets pregnant, and then they have a child, and then they divorce after a month or two. And we've seen this countless times. So it's very important to be in it to win it, before you step into that realm and seek that marital bond, that you have that concept to be in it to win it. Also, it's very important that to know and understand that the marital bond, it takes compromise and it takes understanding. And so, meaning that just because you just got married and you had a concept of marriage and you see some mistakes, don't rush to get a divorce. Don't rush to get a khula. That you need to understand that there's compromise and there's patience with one another. Even sometimes if there's some things that are haram, you can't just immediately dissolve the marriage. Okay, you've got to work on those things. If they are things that are within the boundaries of working towards, for example, if someone is, you marry a woman and she's got a boyfriend, she's actually having illicit relations outside. Well, there's not really any room for patience in that. That mostly it's got to be dissolved. It's got to be dealt with. That is not, or likewise with the man. So there has to be a degree of understanding there in the marriage, and be in it to win it, without losing your self-respect, without um, and using, do not throw out common sense. This is another point I want to mention. Don't throw out common sense, something that you would, prior to Islam, you would not have accepted, and you don't. And sometimes we have to use common sense as well. We're looking at the hukm shari, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us sense. Don't be ridiculous on something, and those boundaries will come from understanding and having some sort of tarbiyah and some sort of background. Also, another point I want to mention as a piece of advice with regards to toxic marriages is be cautious. You have to determine your boundaries, as we said, but do not stay in a destructive situation. If you know and understand in your heart, this is not going to work. And sometimes that happens early on in a marriage. Sometimes it takes time, but you understand that, hey, we are not on the same page, and this is destructive. It's destroying my deen. It's destroying my dunya. Both things. I can't think. I can't cooperate. I can't operate in society. I can't operate even in my home. I'm depressed and so forth. That is not the intent of the Islamic marriage. It's supposed to build one another, harmonize, and comfort one another, and have mercy towards one another. So if it's a destructive, tear down marriage, you seek the counseling. And if you can't rectify it, then maybe it's time. Maybe it's time for the next step, that you do have to be dissolved. Or either the husband can divorce his wife, or the wife can seek a khula, through the proper means. Also, there's a very important, sometimes you find in these marriages that there's incompatibility, that the parties find that they grow apart. They're no longer compatible. They don't like anything the same, and they can't even support one another in their differences. Then this can also be a sign that the marriage is broken down and that there's some toxicity. Again, counseling can help a lot of these things. And also, as we mentioned, having no deen, having no, losing your religion, meaning that the husband no longer prays. He's gotten so bad, he curses and abuses the children, and he's doing some major wicked, evil sins. And that's contrasting Islam, and so that it can't be tolerated. So it gets to a point, it's just so destructive. And there's countless scenarios like that. There's unfortunately times when there's molestation, there's other extreme things going on, which are great evils that cannot be tolerated. You can't be like, I'm patient with that. No. Also, there can be on the side of the woman, she no longer wants to wear hijab. I've known scenarios where brothers had to divorce their wife. They'd been married for 20 years. They had so many kids. And he's like, no, she doesn't. She works, mixes with men. She doesn't want to wear hijab anymore. She doesn't want to pray anymore. Okay, that's a wrap. It's understood that that's not going to work. And she has grown away, maybe even grown away from Islam. Unfortunately, Allah has not given her the light of guidance. So under those circumstances, yes, it is legislated to divorce. So those toxic scenarios can be destructive. Another point, which is also unfortunately, especially in this day and age, I think becoming more and more common, is the lack of attraction. And a lot of this because of the societies, because of the input that we put in. We believe our wives should look like this model. We believe the husband should be like this athlete and this handsome guy on the soap opera. And this also, and he should have such a huge bank account that he can just roll it out. And I have a couple of cars and a couple of houses and a weekly expenditure. So we are tainted by a lot of factors in our society. And that can also sometimes lead to a toxic marriage and destructive tendencies. So those are things that also, through honest conversation and through working together, either have to be overcome, or at some point, perhaps, unfortunately, separation. And sometimes that is better. Sometimes, khairun lakum, this is better for you. And only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. Those are just a few points I wanted to mention with regards to toxicity in marriages and some of the rulings of marriage and divorce. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Almighty to accept our good and forgive our evil. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.